It's Monday night, and you know what that means. Jersey First brings to you the latest edition of Real Talk, and I am New Jersey's premier award-winning journalist, top 100 Latino via the Latino Spirit Online magazine for 2020, 2021, and now in 2022, as well as the Garden State's most beloved and accurate political commentator anywhere here. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is I, Fernando Uribe. Thank you all for joining us here from wherever and however you may be doing so on Facebook Live via StreamYard and also on the Jersey First YouTube page. Make sure you check out Jersey First at their website, www.jerseyfirst.org. That's jersey1st.org. Make sure you like them on Facebook and certainly follow them on both Instagram and Twitter. Of course, check out this show on Instagram as well at Real Talk with Fernando Uribe. Also, my own Instagram at The Amazing Professor, and also on Twitter, folks. Drop that follow on there as well at No Filter Uribe. And of course, make sure you like Real Talk with Fernando Uribe on Facebook as well. Folks, again, happy Monday to you all. Again, Memorial Day weekend right around the corner. Hopefully all of you were able to stay cool this past Saturday and Sunday with some scorching temperatures here in the Garden State. We're kind of back to maybe some spring weather today. Whether it's pollen or the heat, something's always getting us all messed up here in the Garden State, folks. But again, well, thank you all for joining us here on this Monday night. A special shout out to everyone who came out to my birthday party last weekend, actually last Saturday, to Waterside, a great venue up here in North Jersey. Let me give you a little cheers to you. Let me drink a little victory tea for everybody. Again, a special thank you to everyone who turned out, family, members of the inner circle of Fernando Uribe and friends, of course. A lot of great gifts. But arguably, ladies and gentlemen, the most wonderful gift, I would argue, is right behind me. Yes, a shout out to my good friend Emma with that wonderful portrait there, obviously with my Dallas Cowboys in the background. Ladies and gentlemen, I never realized how photogenic and handsome New Jersey premier journalist is. But I'm just joking. I've always been photogenic and handsome. Come on. Don't you know that already, folks? But in any event, I want to thank you all for coming out this past Saturday to Waterside, a great venue in Northeast New Jersey, overlooking the beautiful skyline of Manhattan. And, of course, to all the great birthday wishes last week. And they're still coming in on social media. And, of course, that suit from Oppo Suits certainly received a lot of praise as well. Folks, you definitely want to stick around towards the end of the show because I will have this week's winner of Bad Journalism in New Jersey. And by the way, a little bit of a spoiler, it's not anybody from Insider NJ. What a surprise. They tend to maybe write a column or two that's good once in a while. But then again, folks, a clock is also right twice a day also. But I'll have a new winner this week of who's really bad at journalism in the state of New Jersey. But first, folks, the reason this show continues to be a success and has not just dozens of views or hundreds of views, but I'm talking about thousands and thousands of views, is because of exceptional quality guests. And this week is no exception. She is the executive director of Save Our Schools NJ. Ladies and gentlemen, she is Julie Borst. Join us here on Real Talk via Jersey First. Julie, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you. Well, so good to see you, and thank you for inviting me, and a belated happy birthday to you. I am a fan of that suit, by the way. So if you haven't seen it, go take a look at that suit. It's awesome.
Well, you know what? Again, I have to thank Oppo Suits for that because they have some great colors, and you couldn't miss me even if you were like walking from miles away. That's for sure. Julie, great to have you on here. And folks, if you have a chance, check out their website, www.saveourschoolsnj.org. There is a donate button on the upper right-hand side. And I'm always a gentleman on this show, ladies and gentlemen, because I like to make sure that I take care of my guests and the organizations that they represent. Whether or not I agree with them, we'll figure that out in just a few minutes. But again, during the mornings, obviously, we're getting back to work. We're back in the office. We're back to commuting. Do me a favor, ladies and gentlemen. Instead of getting that super-duper mega cappuccino macchiato or that extra breakfast sandwich that you don't need, right, because you should get summer ready, folks, and everything else is getting so expensive under Sleepy Joe. Do me a favor. Take that money, save it, and donate it via www.saveourschoolsnj.org. Click on the donate button. Your donation is safe and secure online, and it goes a long way in helping organizations like Save Our Schools NJ. So, Julie, I want to do that favor for you early on here in the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Julie, obviously you had a chance to check out my social media. I think maybe whether or not we agree on some things remains to be seen. But my idea of when I want to say that I want to save our schools might be a little bit different than what your organization stands for. So let's sort of separate fact from fiction. What does Save Our Schools NJ represent, and what do they advocate for?
Sure. So Save Our Schools New Jersey is an all-volunteer, primarily public education parents. We have 36,000 membership. We're in every legislative district in the state, which means we're in every district factor group. So from one end of the state to the other, rural, urban, and suburban. And these parents coalesce around the idea that public education is a public good. It is worth keeping. It is worth saving, if you will. The things that we advocate for are funding for public education, primarily that, and that's obviously been a challenge not only in this state, but across the country over the last probably 15 years in particular. We also advocate against high-stakes standardized testing, which is something that sort of took the world by storm several years ago with the introduction of Common Core state standards and the testing that was required with them. So everybody's familiar with PARC. We now have NJSLA, which is really just PARC renamed, and it's a little bit shorter, but New Jersey still does more testing than any other state in the country, and we do more than is federally required. And so that also ties back into school funding because we spend many millions of dollars more on something that we don't really need. So those are the two main things. On an aside, the other two things that are part of our main focus are keeping school vouchers out of the state. And also too for transparency in charter schools, because public money really does need to be able to be followed, and you can't follow public money when it goes to a charter school and goes into the hands of those private operators. We believe that transparency is very important to make sure that schools are doing what they should be doing with that money, and that is in fact going to the kids.
All right, fair enough. All good points. And again, ladies and gentlemen, you can check out obviously their about and their issues on their website, www.saveourschoolsnj.org. And here's some interesting goals, Julie, as I'm doing homework here every week for my guests. I'm looking at two specific points here. Save Our School NJ's goals are to protect and preserve New Jersey's excellent public schools by, number one, keeping the community at large and our legislators informed about issues that directly impact our children's education, both locally and at the state level. And secondly, establishing a statewide network of individuals willing to advocate in support of public education.
Right.
Well, Julie, when I read that, the first thing that comes to mind, not so much about the first element, but the second one, for example, is thinking about the NJEA. While, the AFT represents individuals like myself in higher education.
Sure. And Newark K-12. Yeah.
Yes. And we know what the NJEA stands for, what they've advocated for. And, at times it's interesting, what's been your experience as an organization, whether you've collaborated with the NJEA, because my serious issue, number one, with the NJEA is, I know hundreds of teachers in this state whose membership dues every pay period on the 15th and the 30th of the month, respectively, goes towards the NJEA, and they're either engaging in activism, throwing money towards campaigns. And I just get the sense, and again, we're talking about an executive board that has a ridiculous set of salaries. I'm really concerned about why organizations like them are not really held accountable when it comes to, and again, I'm not saying, I know you're not going to speak for them, but I think that's a big issue when it talks about, advocating in support of public education. I would argue at times the NJEA does a disservice to public education because they're not using the funds correctly. They're backing candidates instead of backing teachers. That doesn't sit well with me, Julie.
So there's a couple of things. So one is we're not affiliated with NJEA.
Sure.
I know we are regularly accused of that, but we are not. Have there been times when we collaborated with them? Yes, absolutely. And because they do have those funds, the ability to get the word out on certain issues, certainly we have collaborated with them. And that is generally around those first two issues around, public school funding, but really primarily around those high stakes testing. So we definitely have collaborated in that respect. As far as unions go in general, I would point you to how states do that do not have teachers unions. They tend to not do as well as the states that do. So there is obviously some good there. And I think the point of having a teachers union is so that teachers can advocate at their local level. So if they're seeing something that administrators are doing or something is happening in the community that they feel strongly about, they do have the ability to speak out. Whether that actually influences anything or not is another story. But at least it gives them that ability to be able to advocate for their students without having to worry about just being fired because they spoke up.
Oh, fair points.
Yeah. Beyond that, I don't really have much else to say about NJEA. I mean, they have a PAC, and I have no idea how that structure works for them. I mean, they must obviously bring teachers in to be able to figure out who they're going to put that money with or whatever, but I don't know how that works for them.
No, absolutely. And folks, if you're just joining us right now, it's 6:11 here on the East Coast. This week's guest on Real Talk with Fernando Uribe via Jersey First is Executive Director of Save Our Schools NJ, Miss Julie Borst, here tonight on StreamYard via Facebook Live, and of course also on the Jersey First YouTube page. Julie, let's sort of talk about the bread and butter issues here. I'm a policy nerd. I love talking policy all day. And I think, it'd be impossible that our audience or parents and taxpayers statewide don't know that our schools, our public schools, are funded by our property taxes, our tax dollars that go into. We have the highest property taxes in the country at an average about $9,200 right now as I'm looking at my sheets here. And what's interesting is that really fluctuates. We're talking about towns like Short Hills, which are somewhere over 24,000 and change a year, which is mind-boggling. To, for example, where I live up here in Hudson County, overlooking Manhattan, I can walk 2 blocks and look at that beautiful skyline. And my property taxes are approaching $10,000. And of course, there's everything in between. Right. It just seems that with the amount of money that we are taking out, with property taxes, and that's how our schools are being funded. Yes, I've seen plenty of statistics and charts and rankings that New Jersey has the best public schools in the country. That's fine.
There's an asterisk on that, though.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And the asterisk, my asterisk on this is, at least from my perspective, is that, when we look at different districts in different counties, maybe more urban areas and suburban or rural collectively, it just seems that, okay, schools, we have the best schools in the country according to rankings, but are they being funded accordingly and appropriately? I would argue, being the skeptic that I am of government, I would argue that more times than not, there are a lot more districts not getting the money that they need as opposed to the money that they deserve. Is that fair to say?
So I think it's actually a very complicated conversation and probably longer than we have to talk about this. And actually, we're lucky here in New Jersey because there's actually a Rutgers professor who specializes in this. And whether or not anybody in New Jersey listens to him, I don't know, but an awful lot of other states do listen to him. So there's a couple of things. So prior to 2008, we were actually funding, and I say this is collectively, the United States was funding their schools a lot more than we currently are. We kind of haven't caught up after 2008. Here in New Jersey, same thing. So the state was putting in or not putting in about $1 billion a year from 2009 all the way up to the point when Governor Murphy went into office. And he has tried very diligently to put more money into the school funding formula every year, trying very hard to get to full funding. We're not there yet. So what this means is that collectively, we are down, probably finger in the wind, probably in the neighborhood of around $10 billion, which we're never going to see ever again. And what that has meant, though, is that as the state has not been putting in their share of money towards public education, that means that the local tax levies have had to meet that difference. One of the reasons why New Jersey is considered to be the number one school district is not actually test scores, which a lot of people think. That's not it, although our test scores are obviously very high. It really is based on our school funding formula, which posits that children who live in low-income areas cost more to educate. And that is because they do not have supports at home for whatever those reasons are. We don't make judgments about that. But children don't come as prepared for whatever reason, whether that's because they're not eating at night, they're not sleeping at night, the lights aren't on, they might be living out of their parents' car, like whatever that thing is. they don't come prepared in the way that they do. I live in a very beautiful, leafy northern Bergen County town. You can talk taxes all day long. Be happy to pay $24,000 in taxes.
Ouch.
But I think, yeah, I mean, okay. So, and people would consider my school district to be probably stellar. We don't do special ed well. So this is the caveat everywhere you go. There is always something in some district, regardless of the relative wealth, that is not working for everybody. And whether that's a goal that you can ever achieve where it works for everybody, maybe not, but it seems like it's a worthy goal to continue to work towards, regardless of what's going on. So would I say that are taxes high in New Jersey? Yes, they are. Is New Jersey well placed to be in the largest employment financial market in the world, New York City? Absolutely. Do we feed that? We absolutely do. Do we have a really robust system here of pharmaceutical companies and engineering companies? Yes, we absolutely do. And our education system is feeding into that. So I would argue that while, yes, the funding is definitely not even, let's put it that way. I'm not sure how to put that. There's certainly room for improvement there, but I think it's also money that's well spent, because if you're not going to put those money, especially into the places where they have lower income, where the property values are not going to raise the kind of taxes that they need to raise the kind of money that they need to educate those kids, that is well worth it. Because without having those kids educated, there is a thing called the school to prison pipeline. That does exist. That is a reality. If those kids are not educated and don't come out of school with a high school diploma, they're going to end up there. And guess what? That's way, way more expensive than educating them while they're still kids.
No, all fair points. Julie, let me ask you this though, because it seems that, again, I'm a fiscal conservative. I talk about it all the time on this program.
I appreciate that. Yep, very much so.
My social media is inundated with it. And again, having worked in government for years, now working in higher education and education overall, I'm always just skeptical about, is there just too much bureaucracy in Trenton in the Department of Education? Is there?
I would say right now there probably isn't, because it doesn't sound like they're staffed very well. So I'm not so sure that that's the case at this point. Whether they're functioning at an optimum level to be able to appropriately help school districts for the things that they need, I would say, in my opinion, just from what I saw, and particularly during the pandemic, and I know that there's an argument to say that, everybody's local issues were local, and they needed the freedom to be able to move about and do the things that they did for the people immediately in front of them. I would say that the support was not there. Okay. So I think there is a very important role for the Department of Education, and that is making sure that money is well spent, that districts are doing the things that we charge them with doing. This is what the CUSAC reports are for, right? It's the self-check to make sure you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing. I think they have a very important role to play that. I think for special ed parents, and I'll just put a plug in here. I'm the mom of a special ed student. There were times when I really could have used their help and they were not helpful to me. So there are certainly places for improvement, of course, and you're going to find that in any institution, but certainly I think we're there. Yeah.
Julie, very much like when I eat a steak, and I don't like to see fat in it. And I just get this bad sense that there's a lot of fat coming out of Trenton in the DOE at times with the budget. Maybe that's just me being cynical at times. Is that a fair statement on my part, where maybe there's still a little bit too much fat coming out of Trenton?
I think you're going to have to be specific about that, because to me, in an organization that currently has 108 openings, I believe, I'm not sure what they're doing with the money that they have, because they haven't hired people to fill whatever positions are open. But if we're talking just generally about how we're spending money in education, I think standardized testing is the biggest waste of money, and we spend millions and millions of dollars every year on that. And our children lose school time for that. I mean, just this past month, our kids were taking NJEA. I was following a parent on Twitter whose son is in middle school in Cherry Hill. And for 3 weeks, his school, which is, I guess, 6, 7, 8, each week a different grade was testing, but the rest of the school had to sit in their homeroom while that grade was testing. And so they missed 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, and actually 5 days in the last week. I'm assuming they were doing makeups at that point. So the kids missed out on an awful lot of school for 3 weeks just so that we could give this test. Now, some of this is a federal problem because
Sure.
the feds require annual testing up from 3 through 8, and then once in high school. But New Jersey does more testing in high school than is actually federally required. So why are we doing that? We also have a high school exit exam that we pay right now about $5 million a year for, and I'm not quite sure why it is that we do that. There are 11 states that have a high school exit exam. Most states don't have it. There've never been more than 26 or 27 states who have ever had that requirement. And part of it is it's not a federal requirement. So why are we doing it? You go to college, you take your classes, you earn your grades, you get your credits, and they hand you a diploma. Then I'll go, oh, by the way, let's give you a random test. Let's see how you do. Right?
Well, Julie, let me ask you this though, because based on that, I'm sure you've done your homework and you've gone to Trenton. You've either sat in on during hearings or spoken to legislators and or advocates like yourself that are also very heavily invested in this. Then, at the end of the day, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but who's really to blame for this at the state level? If we're adding more tests unnecessarily, now is it the legislature? Is it governors in previous terms? I mean, at the end of the day, is there one person to blame, or is it a system?
No, there's a lot of blame to spread around.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of blame to spread around. So I guess we can start, really with Park. And so that actually started a couple of things that were not good. So one was with the introduction of Park, they took a test that was brand new and they ran it and they had it count for something. That is not best practice. So for a standardized test, normally you would do 2 or 3 years and to see what those test results look like to make sure that you were actually testing for the thing that you say you're testing for, right? So that's number one. The other thing that they did was they now took the state statute for the exit exam is a test in the 11th grade. It doesn't have to be a standardized test, just some sort of an assessment in the 11th grade with an opportunity to retake that, whatever that instrument is, in senior year or use a portfolio review in order to graduate. So what they did during the Christie administration was they ignored the 11th grade part and said, well, you can do one of a number of things and then that will count using the Park exam. So that did 2 things. So also the state statute implies that if this is a basic skills test, Park is arguably not the basic skills test. So there were several things going on. And of course, the big thing was the fact that they were using tests that were not given in the 11th grade. And that's when Education Law Center stepped up and said, hey, wait a minute, don't do that. And the court came back and said, yeah, you can't do that, but we also want a menu of things. And so now we have this mishmash of things going on. The Murphy administration, though, when Murphy ran, he ran against high stakes testing. So in other words, lowering the number of tests that we had down to federal minimum was one of them. Also getting rid of the high school exit exam. And those things have not happened. In fact, we have a little bit more testing now than we did because they've just added this thing called Start Strong, which they're planning on running in September when the kids come back to school every year from now on. And there are people in the legislature who truly do believe that this is the way to go. My argument against doing things like this and spending this money and this time is, this has been the story since the 1980s. And then with No Child Left Behind, the stakes were really high for this, right? So you probably remember as an educator at the college level that by 2014, all states had to be proficient, had 100% proficiency, which clearly is never going to happen. You're always going to have special ed students, whatever. That was never going to happen. I don't know how that even made it into federal law, but it did. And the way to get around it was the Obama administration said, well, we'll give you a waiver if you adopt Common Core state standards and adopt testing to go with it. And that's exactly what New Jersey did, without actually ever seeing any of those things because they weren't complete at the time that we adopted them. So I think there is waste there. I think there are people in the legislature who certainly support standardized testing, even though I would say to them, we keep doing this. It doesn't really improve, but there's a reason why. And you haven't addressed the reasons why these things, why every child is not getting, A's essentially, right? If we're not going to address those things, then continuing to use the same type of instrument over and over and over again to test something, all you're telling the kids and all you're telling the school districts is that you're not doing a good job when that's probably not really true. And the instrument is not actually measuring or getting you what it is that you want. A test doesn't teach, it measures. That's it. We're using these tests to to measure one thing, and then we're using it for multiple things that it wasn't created for. So we're doing a lot of things that are actually not right, and we're spending millions and millions of dollars to do this. Why nobody has had the wherewithal to step in and say, you know what, this is really dumb. Why are we doing this? This money could really be spent better elsewhere. I don't know, but I'm perfectly willing to keep having that conversation.
Folks, if you're just joining us right now at 6:25 here on the East Coast, and my guest this week here on Real Talk with Fernando Uribe via Jersey First is the Executive Director of Save Our Schools NJ, Julie Borst, here joining us on Facebook via StreamYard, and of course also on the Jersey First YouTube page. Julie, another big issue I know that Save Our Schools is NJ is really big on, and again, as a conservative, you know, this gets thrown a lot during election season when talking about education, but vouchers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of conservatives, not just in New Jersey, but around the country, are very much in favor of vouchers, helping parents in low-income areas to try to give their kids, you know, the best chance at success with their education, even advocating for more charter schools. I know your organization, I don't want to put words in your mouth or it sort of misconstrue what the website says or what the organization stands for, but it seems like there's some level of skepticism about charter schools and vouchers as well. Let's separate fact from fiction and talk about exactly what's good with charter schools, if anything, and what's bad with them, as well as vouchers, you know, in both.
Sure. So let me start with vouchers. And I think there's some very good examples out there of why vouchers are a problem. In the same way that the way that New Jersey funds their charter schools is the same problem. You're taking that money directly out of the public schools and you're sending it off into private places. So you don't know where that public money actually goes. So that's a problem. There should be transparency there completely. The other thing is, Milwaukee is probably the best test case for this because this is where actually vouchers began. Most of that money in that voucher system has wound up in private religious schools. So essentially you're taking public money, public funds, and you're using that to fund religious education schools. And so there is definitely a problem with that connection. The other thing that I will just say too, you know, even more generally, if you ever take a look at what private schools here in New Jersey cost, you know, you might get a check from your town. Let's say that vouchers actually came to be in New Jersey. You might get a check for $13,000 a year. That's not going to cover private school in New Jersey, and you're on the hook for the rest of it. For special ed families, this is a particular problem.
Sure.
Because when you take a voucher in any other state, you sign away your rights, your child's rights to have access to an appropriate education. And that obviously comes with some big ramifications for special ed families. That is not always, unfortunately, well articulated to those families, but that is definitely a problem. So we'll see. I know there's a new voucher bill that was just dropped. So we'll see how that goes. I don't expect that to move right now, but you never know. But there are definitely problems with that. And again, that ties back to school funding in general. Like you're purposely pulling money out of the public system. Then you're going to say, well, we can't do this, that, or the other thing because that money is gone out of the system. But the public system has to educate everybody. Private schools don't have to educate anybody they don't want to. There is this notion out there that, oh, as a parent, you know, I can choose this private school I want my child to go through. I'm going to have more say in what happens in that school, when actually the opposite is really true. They're picking the students, not the other way around. Well, charter schools. So New Jersey has some very specific issues around this. So number one is how charters are funded. So charter money comes directly out of the school districts that the children come from. So, and what has happened, whether this was done intentionally or not, doesn't really matter. The outcome of this is that charter schools take and keep kids who tend to do better on their own. So while they have special education students, they might be dyslexia, but you're never going to see traumatic brain injury in those places. Also, English language learners tend not to be in those schools as well. By the way, we have the same problem at the county VOTEC level too, same sort of issue where kids sort of get sorted. Whether that was the intention or not, that is just the reality of how it happened. Now, the thing for charter schools and how they stay open is their liquidity. So because these are private operating companies, some of them are nonprofit, some of them are for-profit. But They're private operating companies. So what their liquidity is, can you keep the doors open? Can you pay your teachers? Can you make sure that you have programs going for your kids and so on and so forth? And then the other piece of that is standardized testing. Their lives, their livelihoods are based on how those kids do on standardized testing. Standardized testing can be gamed, frankly. And so the idea that charters, the original idea of charters was to have a place where kids who are struggling the most can be in a unique environment with teachers who are dedicated to figuring out how to educate kids and to hopefully come up with innovative, interesting ways, enrichment, whatever those things are, to educate these kids. That's kind of not what we wound up doing here in New Jersey, because as soon as you put that standardized test requirement in there, then that's how you're going to live and die. That kind of takes away the creativity piece, because you do have to be concerned with how those standardized tests, those kids that you keep in those schools have to be testing well, because otherwise your doors are going to get shut. So I would argue a couple things. One is that New Jersey should pull that funding stream away. There should be a separate line item in the budget for that. And if we want to have charter schools, that's how they should be funded. You should leave the public schools, the traditional public schools, intact. And that has not happened. That's another thing, too, by the way, that happened during the Christie administration. So all these districts were losing about $1 billion a year collectively. Charter schools and the county votex, by the way, were held harmless. So they got the same amount of money that they would have gotten had that $1 billion been in the system. So they were getting funded as close to fully funded as they possibly could be relative to everybody else during that time. And I forgot where else I was going with this, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly problems with this. And so moving the funding stream, so you're removing the piece where the districts gets hit by this, because they still have to educate the most expensive children to educate, explicitly the special ed students, right? And you're having to do that now with less money. So that's obviously not a good thing. And then the test score requirement means that you are going to have to do a fair amount of test prep to make sure that those kids are hitting those higher marks. I think if you take a look nationally at charter schools, as to the extent that you can, though, what you're going to find is that there are some charter schools who do this really well, and there are some that it don't, and that it kind of evens out. So we're spending money, which is on basically a parallel, unequal, and separate system, and we're using public money to do both things. So why are we doing that exactly, right? It would seem to make more sense to me to pull charter schools back kind of more into the public umbrella, so that it does become that place where innovative things can happen. I just think that the way that our law is set up here in New Jersey doesn't actually allow for that. And I'm sure I'm going to hear from the New Jersey Charter School Association after this for having said that, but that's my opinion.
Julie, let me ask you this, though, because it seems that I can hear the frustration in your voice as a parent, as a taxpayer. Then it sort of just begs the question, then, what's been the success rate, if you can quantify it for me, about Save Our Schools NJ or other advocacy groups in talking to the legislature? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it takes legislators to pass laws, to change what happens with curriculums. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because that's also been in the news cycle. But what's been your experience about? Is the legislature just tone deaf? Are they just resistant? What's the issue? I mean, maybe it's not as simple as black and white, but what are you seeing as the biggest obstacles right now when it comes to your organization talking to legislators, say, listen, we need to change this. We need to sort of reassess funding and where it's going, and making sure that it's not being wasted. I mean, are you coming across some roadblocks?
So, yeah, I think there have been some specific people who have been very specific roadblocks. One of them is no longer in the legislature.
Can you drop some names?
Sure, Steve Sweeney.
Okay.
And in fact, he blocked some legislation that we thought was pretty basic and put a resolution through instead. And so you can imagine how many people ignored that. So I would say that it was mixed. So to give you an example, we delivered 10,000 signatures to the legislature when they were about to make PARC the high school graduation requirement. And these were parents saying no. It made quite the thud on the desk, and obviously we were ignored. We delivered those same signatures to the State Board of Ed. Obviously that was ignored. There is an awful lot of ignoring. But I will say we've had some basic wins though. When Park was first introduced, it was introduced as a 3 through 8 in high school exam because that's what the federal requirements were. But there was immediately talk about having a Park exam all the way down to kindergarten. And we just thought, I can't even imagine what a standardized test for a kindergartner actually looks like, especially in a test like Park. But we did find a couple of champions, and we do have a law that says that you cannot have a test that is not diagnostic. So in other words, you still can't test obviously for special ed and things like that. We do have a law in the books that says you can't do standardized testing that's Park-like in grades 1, 2, and 3. So we do have things like that. What we were hoping to do, because there was this whole thing about opting out, and what New Jersey now says you have to say refuse. You can't use the term opt out, which is silly. The first year I opted my daughter out, I could say opt out, and that was perfectly fine. It wasn't until we had 130,000 parents saying, no, this is really dumb, we're not going to participate, that all of a sudden there were language games there. But people were forcing kids to sit in the testing rooms. There was some question by Park actually about whether or not you could do that and call that valid for the rest of the students, because it was disruptive, obviously, to have a kid just sitting there while everybody else is taking the test. Mm-hmm. So we tried to have a law to say that sit and stare was not okay. You had to find something else for these kids to be doing, somewhere else for them to be doing busy work or whatever. And Senator Ruiz and Senator Sweeney at the time said, no, we're not going to support that. And they passed a resolution suggesting that school districts should not do that. But of course, in some places that did happen, still happens. I've just been helping parents this last month opt out after they've been told, oh, they said we can't do that anymore. Yeah, you can.
Okay.
And this leads into parents' rights, right?
Sure. And I'm glad you brought up the concept, because I was going to bring this up here. And let me just read you a quote from this weekend. We talked off the air a little bit, and I'm a guy who watches cable news, watches talk shows, both on the right and the left. And there aren't a lot of things I agree with Bill Maher on. Bill Maher is a classical liberal, not one of these woke leftist liberals, I think, but he said something really interesting. I'm just going to read you the transcript.
Sure.
He said, I'm just saying that when things change this much, this fast, people are allowed to ask, what's up with that? All the babies are in the wrong bodies. Was there a mix-up at the plant, like the Captain Crunch, oops, all berries? It wasn't that long ago when adults asked their children, what do you want to be when they grow up? Like they meant like what profession? So he goes on to say, I'm happy for LGBT folks that we now live in an age where they can live their authentic lives openly, and we should always be mindful of respecting and protecting. Absolutely. Fair point by Bill Maher. I can be down with that. But I can also be down with this as well. And he also said, he closed it with, but someone needs to say it. Not everything's about you. And I'll tell you, as a guy who's been on this show, as probably the only journalist talking about the ongoing debate concerning sex ed curriculum, I understand that a lot of these bills and different parents' rights, whatever, have varied state by state. It's gotten some scoring in Florida. It's gotten some scoring in Arizona, down south, maybe wherever. But Julie, at the end of the day, what I would argue is this. I don't have any kids that I know of. But if I had a child in a school district, again, at the end of the day, for me, kids are impressionable. Okay? We were 5, 6 years old once too. We were stupid. Okay? Kids can be stupid. Okay? Let's just say that's not offensive. But kids are really impressionable. The idea that some parents might be concerned about what maybe certain districts incorporating certain curriculum into grades as early as 1 or 2, kids as young as 5 or 6 or 7. Here's a newsflash to everybody. That doesn't make those parents bigots. It doesn't make them homophobes. It doesn't make them transphobe. It makes them parents. And again, they're paying property taxes. They're funding schools. So I think if parents want to have a say, and they do, because again, parents have the option to opt their children out of curriculum that they don't see fit. That's fine. However, again, I think there's this absolute mentality that if a parent takes a stand about this at their local school board and starts denouncing this curriculum, there comes this vilification from the left and from these advocacy groups where, I'm sorry, that does not pass the mustard with me. Doesn't make anybody a transphobe or a homophobe or a bigot. It just makes them parents. And I think they have a right to be parents. Julie, where am I wrong in the way I'm looking at this entire thing?
So, I obviously think that parents have the right to be parents too. And
Mhm.
so there's a few different things here. And I will tell you what I have seen personally. So the first is, the right to opt out, and I'm going to tie this back to opt out because I think this is important too, is actually tied to the 14th Amendment. You as a parent do have a right to have a say in, the direction of your child's education. Yes, you definitely do. If you're participating in public education, there is a larger public good here than just yourself. Whether that jives with, what your belief system is, sometimes it won't. I think everybody in some way or another does come across that at some point. I also think that from what I have seen and heard directly is that a lot of people don't know the process for how a state, and in New Jersey specifically, how they develop their standards, what body that happens in, how you engage with that body and provide feedback to that body. Because I've seen comments and people, oh, they did this under cover of night. No, they definitely did not. It was there. We all saw it. You just weren't looking at that time, or you don't know where to look.
Well, Julie, to
So
be
I
fair,
think, and I think, and it was so.
Julie, to
So I
be
think
fair,
this is important because what I hear is great frustration from parents because they're doing a few things. They're conflating standards with curriculum.
okay.
So that's number one. They're interchanging those things. Those are not the same. So you're having a conversation with people who know and only operate in a world where they do know those different things. And so you're not using the right language to address what your concern is. You don't know where and how to engage at that point. So standards are something that happens with the Department of Education and the State Board of Ed. And I think what's really interesting at this point is that the State Board of Ed, even though it has 9 expired seats still, almost all of those seats were from the Christie administration. Those were all came from that administration, not from the current administration, which is sort of interesting politically. And there is a process by which you can put your input into what those state standards are. Those things are announced on the Department of Education website regularly. You can go see that. It's there for all the world to see. Whether or not you knew that or not is another story entirely. Mm-hmm. Then curriculum. Okay, standards get adopted by your local school board. Those are your friends who got elected to the school board, maybe yourself even. They direct the curriculum that's created to carry out what's said in the standards. The curriculum could be anything. Standards very often are, child has to be exposed to this one thing. That might be a 5-minute conversation, not 3 months worth of curriculum, right? Mm-hmm. And when it comes to things like sex ed, those are age-appropriate things. Our kids are being taught, like Fernando, looks like this, and Mike looks like that, and Julie looks like this, and everybody is different, and that's okay. It's about learning to get along. SEL is another thing. Social emotional learning is another thing that's being attacked in other parts of the country, not so much here in New Jersey, but it's that same, oh my God, right? So let me put SEL into a different language. It's soft skills. It's social skills. It's how to get along with people. It's how to cooperate. It's what you're going to need when you get out in the world and you're working somewhere. You're going to have to be able to communicate effectively with the people that you work with. That's all SEL is. And the sex ed thing is the same thing. Your school district is not showing 5-year-olds pornography. That's just simply not happening. Okay. If you want to engage at the local level as curriculum is being developed, you need to pay attention to what's happening at your school board. You certainly should be in touch with your local superintendent and your board president, although boards don't necessarily directly communicate back to the public. They'll do everything through the superintendent and say, I would like to learn, when is this going to happen? And at what point can I, put input into what's happening so that I have a say, so I can be heard? That's how you do that. Sure. Well, that piece seems to be missing in this conversation. And I've seen a lot of very, very upset people because they feel like they didn't have a chance to engage civically. Mm-hmm. And it's mostly because they just didn't know.
Well, Julie, a couple of things here. Just from my notes, I know that you mentioned about it being passed. And you're right. It wasn't passed in the dark of night and nobody knew about it. Yeah, it was passed in June 2020. I think the reason people have made a big stink about it is obviously what we were living through in June 2020. Our attention.
I mean, it was horrible, right? But the good news is, though, is that all during this time, and currently, God only knows why, State Board of Ed meets every month the first Wednesday of every month at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's online. So you can see all of it.
No, it certainly is. And again, what maybe a concern of mine, because again, working in higher ed, when my department chair says, "Hey, Fernando, you're going to teach A, B, and C." Great. I'm a professor. I make the syllabus. I have enormous autonomy, unless I'm teaching something really egregious.
Right.
After the department chair reviews,
but as you should, right? You should have that, right?
Oh, of course, yeah. I'm good to go. Some checks and balances, oversight. When it trickles down into the high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, you're absolutely correct. Yes, individual districts create certain standards and everything else. Parents have obviously every opportunity now that we're back to normal, right? And hopefully COVID's gone for good, and parents can go to school board meetings and speak during the 5-minute public portion. That's great. My concern is like anything else. I know plenty of teachers that identify on the right, like myself, and those who do not. And I know that sometimes curriculum, teachers, you give teachers a little bit of freedom, and who knows, some teachers might take the curriculum in a different direction. Yeah, it might pass district standards, but it might be a little too explicit for some and for some parents. My concern, though, Julie, at the end of the day is, listen, it's an election year, midterm wise. There's House seats up in New Jersey. There's House seats nationally. There's Senate seats. Right. It's become a big culture war issue. And again, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is parents that are speaking up, parents that are concerned about what their kids might be exposed to as young as 5 or 6, I think have a right to be concerned. Now, to your point about having certain social skills, because yes, gay kids exist. When I was in elementary school,
I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about being able to carry on a conversation with somebody, being able to cooperate, understanding what a deadline is, knowing that you have to show up, like all that stuff. This is not just about, gay kids at all.
Certainly. But again, going back to when I was in elementary school and even to high school, like, okay, we kind of knew which kids were gay, and those conversations were had at some point. There was some curriculum on it, not much, very basic during health education, right? It was not called sex, it was called health, right? And again, I think it also becomes a cultural issue as well, because again, I'm Hispanic, and especially in the Hispanic community, having these conversations weren't always easy, at least when I was growing up. Now they're easier. Social media, pop culture to some extent has made it a lot more easy to discuss this, and there's a lot more fluidity in curriculum. But at the end of the day, I think this is a cultural war issue that's not going away, because there are some parents that might say, well, hey, school districts might, try to not bamboozle, but do things that don't sit well with us. And you know what? We have a right to speak out. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road. I think this is where the conflict arises, Julie.
So I would say, in that case, frankly, I obviously hear from parents all over the state on a variety of issues. I have yet to see a school district where somebody is specifically kind of going rogue, if you will, and taking something a step further than most people would think are acceptable. In the case of these current standards, they don't actually go into effect until next school year. So schools may not even have their curriculum adopted yet. So I know there's an awful lot of noise around this. And obviously these people you can tell they feel very, very passionate about this. I would hope that they're able to engage in a way, though, with their school district to find out exactly what those things are before they start accusing people of being groomers and pedophiles. And we're seeing a lot of that kind of language just being tossed around. And that's really not fair, because that's not what's happening. I think, and again, too, another thing that's really kind of bothering me is, especially around these parental rights bill, and the first one dropped in, Arizona a few months ago. You can kind of see it as it becomes successful on one side, it kind of moves on to the next one. Kind of stalled out in Kansas for a while because it was calling for curriculum to be online and for parents to see this. And a parent showed up at that hearing and pulled out her iPhone and said, "I can see exactly what my daughter is learning today. Like, we don't need this. We can already do it." Understand, though, as parents, you do have a right to see what your school's curriculum is. All you have to do is ask. Many school districts already post all of it already. Senator Gopal's bill, says that sex ed explicitly has to be posted on there so you can see it. But there is a step before that where you do have a right as a citizen to participate in your local school board. And, you can run for school board, or or you can go to your school board and your superintendent and say, you know what, this is really important to me, and this group of families with me feels this way too. Would you please consider putting together a working group so that we can come to something that is agreeable for everybody? Superintendents should absolutely be reinforcing the idea that parents can remove their children if there's sensitive discussions happening. Parents have had the right to do that forever. That's a 14th Amendment right. It's codified here in New Jersey since 1980. So the idea that somehow we need something new for this is not true at all. And I get very frustrated hearing people say, oh, well, we have to have this. Well, it's already there. So why are you telling parents that can't already do this? You can do this. And I would say that, as far as the culture war around all of these issues, none of this is new. We have seen versions of this going on for probably 50 years or more. I think what's concerning to me as a public education advocate is that there is absolutely a concerted effort to privatize public education. And I believe, and Save Our Schools New Jersey believes, that that is a problem. And they're using these issues as a wedge issue to create a culture war in order to do this. These are serious issues. And I'm not trying to minimize how parents feel about this, because this is something that parents have always felt strongly about. That's not new. And you do have a way to remedy that. And I would hope that parents would engage civically. I think all parents should be doing that. And if this is the impetus to get more people to do that, great. They definitely should be doing that. But there is definitely an effort to privatize public education. That's something that's happening from both sides of the aisle, by the way. And that's a hard conversation to have with a lot of people, because they're very wed to the idea of being conservative or liberal or whatever. And my group of people does this. Well, your group of people, both groups of people can be bad actors in this space. And I believe that anybody who's out there trying to privatize public education, in my mind, becomes a bad actor, because public education is there for everybody. There's a reason why it exists. We need to have a literate and functioning society in order to maintain our way of life. And if you don't have that, that just means that people with the most amount of means will have better and better and better access to everything, and people who don't simply won't. And that's not good.
Julie, all fair points. I think we've had a great conversation tonight. I wish we could talk for 2 more hours and still not get through everything.
I could talk all day.
Absolutely.
But
Julie, before I let you go, I want to thank you for your time. I know that these are important issues, not just because it is an election year here in New Jersey, but also because it matters every day. Absolutely. And I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show. Again, all I ask is, please tell everyone how much of a fan you are of Real Talk with Fernando Uribe via Jersey First. I think this has been a very meaningful and illuminating conversation. Again, folks, the reason this show is successful is because of great guests like tonight, for example, with Julie Borst, the executive director of Save Our Schools NJ. So I want to thank you for your time. You've been absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been educational. Again, not to sort of, repeating, but it's been really educational though, Julie. I really appreciate your time. I'll give you the last word here.
So I just want to thank you for the time tonight. This has been fun. I'm glad Sue Altman couldn't make it. So you and I had a chance to meet and talk. I think this is great. And I very much appreciate, all sides of this discussion. You cannot move forward, all of us cannot move forward unless we're all together. And so, I think that those lines of communication always need to be open. I will also say, too, that of our 36,000 members, we do run the full rainbow of political spectrum. And the one thing that everybody does coalesce around is our public schools and just how important that is for all of us.
Well, we'll leave it right there. Julie, have I won your favorite journalist award maybe in your eyes yet?
I think so. Yeah, Matt Friedman's got to do some work.
Well, wow, that's really kind of you. Well, Matt will be on soon again. I had him on a few weeks back. Not sure if you caught that episode, but we had a really lively exchange about the entire curriculum debate. So if you haven't caught it, I definitely urge you to go to the archives and check it out. But
I'll take a look at that. Yeah, so I will tell you. So wait a second. So let me tell you who one of my favorite people are, though, is Carly Citron, who writes for Politico Pro and is their education writer. And she actually does really a tremendous job about writing about public education in New Jersey. I'm sorry that most of her stuff is behind a very expensive paywall.
Sure.
But yeah, she actually does a very good job, I think, of reporting on education in New Jersey, and that's so important, really.
I'll try to get her on. Now that you dropped the name, I'll try to get her on. But I appreciate your time. Folks, she is Julie Borst, the Executive Director of Save Our Schools NJ. Again, check out the website, www.saveourschoolsnj.org. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, listen, get summer ready. Skip that super duper mega cappuccino macchiato. Skip that breakfast sandwich. Get summer ready, folks. And again, it's too expensive enough as it is because of Sleepy Joe. Take that money, click on the donate button on their website. Once again, www.saveourschoolsnj.org. Your online donation is safe and secure. Once again, she is Julie Borst, the Executive Director of Save Our Schools NJ. Julie, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Your time, and thank you for showing support for Real Talk via Jersey First. Have a great one.
Thank you. You too.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Folks, again, great episode with, again, Julie Borst, the Executive Director of Save Our Schools NJ. And certainly these are the great guests that I'll continue to bring you on every single week here on the program. Folks, before I let you go, let me finish with this week's winner, okay, of bad journalism in New Jersey. And yes, you know what? I decided to give a break to Insider NJ and Maxie Pizarro, who coincidentally actually happened to write a pretty insightful column this past week. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, a clock is also right twice a day too. So I'll give Maxie a benefit of the doubt here this week. I'll lay off of him since I've been scorching him for the last few weeks along with his colleagues, the birthday boy last week, Jay Lasher. Once again, Jay, happy 70th birthday. I know 70 years, I mean, you look 70. I'll tell you, it's a great accomplishment for you. And hope you celebrate many, many more. Again, happy 70 to you. And Maxie, nice for you to be off the hook this week. But guess who isn't off the hook, folks? Yes, it's Tommy Boy, Tom Moran. Yes, from that garbage newspaper. I'll say it again, absolute garbage, the Star Ledger. Yes, folks, that paper is not worth what it's printed on. Okay, now, if you have an expensive vase, for all of you, again, it's the end of the month, right? Memorial Day weekend's right around the corner. People may be looking to relocate. So if you need to move and you need to wrap that expensive vase that grandma gave you, or maybe wrap securely that very expensive china set that your great grandmother gave you, folks, look no further. Go to the local newsstand, pick up the Star Ledger, and use that because that's all it's good for. It's not worth reading. And what's hysterical to me is getting these little emails or ads on Instagram or Facebook about, support local journalism, support journalism that matters to you. Well, there's a lot of journalism that matters to me, but it's not the Star Ledger. But of course, let's leave it up to their editor-in-chief of the editorial page, right behind me, Tommy Boy, of course, Tom Moran. And yes, of course, I get it. If I was making the money that I'm making at the Star Ledger, I wouldn't, I'd keep doing it too. But at some point in time, you have to have a little self-awareness. The Star Ledger is garbage. But again, as long as you're happy getting a paycheck, what does it matter to you? But so let me just get into a little of some columns here that you can look up at muckrack.com. Again, just type in Tom Moran, and you can see some of the insufferable columns that Tommy Boy publishes. And here's one that really caught my eye, last week, right before my birthday. He titled it, "Confront the Racists, Including Tucker Carlson, who fuel the massacres," right? So America's white population dropped over the last decade for the first time in history, and immigration accounted for the bulk of our population growth. By 2044, give or take, whites will be outnumbered. Now, why exactly is that regarded as a threat? Why are we again in mourning after a mass murder committed by an angry white man who simply could not bear the thought? Now, again, the suspect, Peyton Gendron, 18 years old, is a declared white supremacist who believes in the Great Replacement theory, a toxic idea that inspired several racist mass shootings in recent years. They include the killing of 9 Black parishioners at their church in Charleston in 2015, the anti-Semitic rampage that left 11 dead at a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018, and the slaughter of 20 at a Walmart in El Paso, in a rampage that was aimed at Latinos. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole virtue signaling that Tom Moran's going to get into here, but as we're sort of going through the column, what what Tom Moran fails to realize, and again, it's interesting for him to sit on his high horse in Montclair, the People's Republic of Montclair, sipping his third Starbucks coffee of the day, is, folks, I understand mass shootings are still a problem. There are culprits who are indeed white that target minorities, and that's a serious issue. What Tom Moran won't talk about, and just like the rest of the liberal media in New Jersey, and even as much more egregiously nationally, is the idea that when it comes to crime and minorities being targeted, well, here's the newsflash. They're targeted by fellow minorities, okay? And here's some stats, again, folks, that people like Tom Moran, the virtue singers, because I bet you anything. I bet you Tommy Boy was one of those white woke people in Montclair in the summer of chaos, in the summer of looting, in the summer of destruction, right? That when BLM, right, buy large mansions, right? Isn't that what BLM stands for? I don't know. That's what it stands for me, but I could be wrong. Or Antifa, when they went around burning cities to the ground, looting and, vandalizing federal buildings, that wasn't really talked about too much by Tom Moran, right? He wants to sort of focus on it. Listen, whether or not white supremacy is the most serious public health problem in the United States, well, that's what Sleepy Joe would tell you, and that's what Tommy Boy would tell you. But that's just not the case. Is it a problem nationally? It certainly is. I'm not disagreeing with that for a moment. But the problem is that Tommy Boy, like many on the left in journalism and in media, what they won't want to discuss or won't want to tell you is that black on black crime is just as serious, if not worse. But they won't do that. Okay, here's some numbers again. The professor likes to hold class and get some numbers here. So again, this is from the FBI report in 2020. Okay. Now, certainly there were 5,000 extra Americans killed during 2020. A majority of them were African Americans, as they make up 53% of homicide victims, right? The reason for the extra deaths in 2020, again, incarceration rates fell, police manpower was shrinking, and anti-police protests were spreading across the country. Well, this is the problem, though, folks, that 53% of African American, specifically males, are indeed victims of homicide, but they're victimized by fellow black males. Now, that's not popular to say, but that's the truth. When you go to dumps, and I can use another word, it rhymes with it hole, but this is a family-friendly program, so I'm not going to use that word. But take your pick: Newark, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Camden, Cleveland, St. Louis, Oakland. You know what? All these urban cesspools, you know what they all have in common? Chicago. I mean, how can I forget the Windy City? Where a high propensity of victims of homicide are black, and they're killed by fellow blacks. That's just the truth. Now, do we have to have a discussion about what should be done in the black community to address this? That's a topic for a different day, folks. But what Tommy Boy won't tell you is that this is just as pervasive a problem, if not worse. And I get it. He wants to go vilify Tucker Carlson, and that's his prerogative. That's his opinion, because he's probably one of the 9 viewers that watches CNN and or MSNBC on a nightly basis. Folks, the only reason those garbage channels have any viewership is because they're on in airports and in gyms. Nobody of any sound intelligence would watch these garbage channels. Just like anybody of any sound intelligence wouldn't read garbage newspapers like the Star Ledger. But more on that later. But this is the thing, though, about people like Tommy Moran. Okay? He wants to virtue signal. He wants to vilify people like Tucker Carlson. Folks, Tucker Carlson is an opinion journalist, very much like myself. And when Tucker Carlson decides to be a little polarizing and wants to gaslight, he knows what he's doing. He wants to get viewers. Just like myself, I know what to say to get traffic. Now, I'm not going to put myself in the category of Tucker Carlson. He certainly has better hair than me. I think I dress better than him, but that's not the point. Okay? The point is that what he's trying to do is bring up issues that don't get discussed in mainstream liberal media. And the same thing with Tom Moran. Do you think for 1 second Tommy Boy has even written one column, just one column, about the fraud that is Black Lives Matter, the organization, that has taken in millions upon millions of dollars in donations? And what has one of the co-founders done? Go compensate her baby daddy, go compensate her brother, and buy yourself maybe more than one large mansion somewhere in California? Has there been one, I don't know, neighborhood cleanup in any Black community in this country? Has there been one Black scholarship offered to any Black student excelling in academics in high school to be able to go to college? Has there been one mortgage paid out or paid for to one Black family buying their first home? Of course not, because that will require transparency from media. And we don't get that. And we're not getting that from Tommy Boy here. You listen, Tom, you want to go blame Tucker Carlson or, great replacement theory all you want. That's your prerogative. People are going to read it. People are going to say, well, I either believe it or I don't. But what you're not doing, though, Tom, is being consistent or being somewhat transparent. Why aren't you writing about, again, the excessive amount of Black on Black crime? Because that is what's plaguing our inner cities. That is what's plaguing this country as a whole, especially in urban areas. Is white supremacy still a problem? To some extent, yes. Is it the overblown hysteria that you and the president, whenever he's awake, because God knows whenever he's sleeping, right, that wants to talk about white supremacy being the most dangerous public health problem in the United States? I disagree. It's a problem, absolutely. But is it the problem that you, Tommy, and other liberal journalists want to make it out to be? I don't think so. And again, this is what makes you guilty of bad journalism, okay? Let me go to another column of yours that really sort of caught my eye here. Here goes Tommy Boy writing, the Supreme Court shows courage on a cop killer's parole. So, just after midnight nearly 50 years ago, 2 state police officers were shot dead by 3 armed militants from the Black Liberation Army, a radical group. That's not racist. That's not bigoted. That's fact. Look it up. You can Google it. They've had radical stances and radical, manifestos that they've put out there. Both left to bleed out on the shoulder on the New Jersey Turnpike. One of the militants died that night from bullet wounds. A second fled to Cuba 6 years later after escaping from prison. And the third, Sundiata Acoli, is now an 85-year-old inmate with mild dementia who is about to be freed from prison to live out his remaining days with his daughter and grandchildren in Brooklyn. It's an ending to this horror story that is bound to leave many people furious. Acoli was convicted of killing trooper Werner Forrester, who was shot twice in the head with his own revolver. Forrester was 34 at the time, a married man, risking his life to protect the public. It was a grotesque crime. How nice of Tommy to put that in there. But the law back then gave even cop killers a right to seek release on parole. And when Acoli became eligible in 1993, the law required that the state parole board to release him unless it could show a, quote, substantial likelihood that Acoli would continue to commit crimes. For nearly 30 years, the parole board has turned Acoli down over and over as he grew to be an old man, as he repeatedly expressed remorse. Well, of course, what else is he going to do, Tommy? And he lived as a model prisoner, not just obeying the rules, but studying the law and vocational trades, advising younger inmates, and winning the praise of both his peers and prison administrators. I've seen this act before. This isn't anything new, Tommy. It makes it seem like this guy reinvented the wheel. He didn't. Understand that this is not an argument about Acoli's soul or his worth as a human being. Oh, gee, Tom, how nice of you to say that, where the question's kind of rhetorical. Or the beauty of forgiveness. Put all that aside. Well, it's kind of hard, Tommy. We live in the real world. We don't live like you do in this ivory tower, People's Republic of Montclair, sipping macchiatos and cappuccinos, virtue signaling, making really good money for a garbage newspaper. But again, let me not digress. This is about the rule of law. The parole board was required by statute to carefully weigh Acoli's good behavior behind bars before making its decision. Instead, it acted like a vengeful mob parading with torches at midnight, charging towards a verdict that was already decided. Now, again, I'm just skip a couple of sections here that I highlighted here. Now, the parole board was used most of its hearing to relitigate exactly what role Acoli played on the night of the murders. That was not enough for the parole board, whose members pressed Acoli to speculate on who fired the gun, even if it couldn't remember. When Acoli said he believed Forrester was shot by the second trooper, the board apparently took that as a failure to repent. Well, that's what it looks like to me, Tom. You don't need a PhD in political science to know this. Albin notes that even the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office found the forensic evidence regarding who fired the gun inconclusive. Well, how convenient to mention that. For the parole board to latch onto this one factual gray area to deny Acoli parole is unreasonable, especially given his unqualified remorse. I don't know, to you it's unqualified, but how about the family of those troopers, Tommy? You ever think about them and how they have to still live with that pain? Of course not, because why pass up the opportunity to virtue signal? You wouldn't be Tommy Boy Moran otherwise if you weren't doing that. So after the court's decision, Governor Phil Murphy and Attorney General Matt Plaquemine both took the easy political path and joined the mob. No, that's not true because, again, this is an election year. It's not like this is something that Governor Phil Murphy has to run on. He barely won re-election. He's fine. He'll finish out his second term and move on. So there's no political expediency here by the governor or by the attorney general. They criticized the court, arguing that the cop killers should never have been released, a view that many people share. But that was not the law of the land in 1973 when these crimes were committed. These are tough times for the rule of law in America, with faith in the U.S. Supreme Court at an all-time low. No, Tom, that's not true. They might be skeptical of what happened because of the recent leak, but it's not at an all-time low. It's probably the one institution in government right now that people have somewhat more faith in than the executive branch, with an incompetent president that's experiencing dementia. You want to talk about this guy displaying dementia? The president of the United States right now is displaying dementia. Not once do you ever write about it. But again, why not deflect? Because that's what Tommy's good at. We're fortunate here in New Jersey to have a court with the guts to ignore politics and do the right thing. Well, again, Tommy, you're entitled to your opinion, but the problem is, again, you're virtue signaling here, okay, when it comes to what you do on a consistent basis in your columns, okay? In this case, listen, I'll say it very openly. I couldn't give two drops of piss about whether or not this guy gets to live out his remaining days with his kids or his grandchildren in Brooklyn. I could care less, okay? That's not my concern. My concern is the fact that, he committed a horrible crime and the parole board dropped the ball here, per se, in letting him live out his remaining days. He should be rotting in prison for the rest of his life. But again, that's not something that Tommy Boy would ever tell you, because Tommy Boy would rather virtue signal, again, the bleeding heart that he is, and, kind of gloss over this crime. He'll put in little sentences there to sort of remind you of how grotesque it was. Well, Tommy, if it was grotesque, then you know what? You shouldn't have an issue about anyone wanting him to stay in prison. But again, this is what the Star-Ledger, the most garbage newspaper, physical newspaper, folks, again, that you can go and buy and read. Again, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. But somehow Tommy Boy will go on there and virtue signal, whether it was the previous article I just mentioned, where he won't talk about black on black crime, which is still, folks, the most serious problem in urban cities, not white supremacy. Yes, these incidents have happened. They're unfortunate, and my heart and soul and my prayers go out to those families affected. Okay? But to make this notion that white supremacy is happening every other day, no. Tommy, did you remember that black kid that shot a police officer in New York City? And because of the woke leftist district attorney in New York, that kid now is free? You ever talk about that? Oh, of course not, because it's easier to vilify white people than it is anybody else, because it serves your agenda. And I could bring up plenty of other examples where black people have used firearms to commit crimes, not just on fellow blacks, but on also white and other demographics. But you don't ever want to talk about that, Tommy. Again, it's easier for you to virtue signal and write your garbage columns for a garbage newspaper. Tommy, I don't know how old you are, okay? But you're a grown-ass man. You need to do better. And I understand that you make really good money with the Star-Ledger, writing these god-awful, insufferable columns. But at some point, Tommy, you got to look at a mirror, whether it's in the bathroom when you're brushing your teeth, whether it's you combing your hair, whatever. Tommy, have some self-awareness, okay? Be a little more transparent and be a little more genuine here, okay? And be a little more legitimate. All you're doing is virtue signaling. I don't know for the life of me how the Star-Ledger still has a subscriber base. Maybe, I don't know, does it have a crossword puzzle? I mean, their sports section is pretty good, but I wouldn't pay $1 for that. I can just watch it, or read it for free online. But folks, again, if there's any money you're ever going to spend, don't spend it on the Star-Ledger. It's a garbage newspaper with garbage columns. And of course, why not call out perhaps the most garbage of columnists, because he does it quite often, and that's Tommy Boy, Tom Moran. So Tom Moran, congrats to you. You are this week's winner of Bad Journalism in New Jersey. Check out that picture behind me. Wow, I'll tell you, look at that kisser. That's a face only a mother would love. And even then, I don't know if she could. Folks, that's our show for this week. And certainly I want to thank Julie Borst, the Executive Director of Save Our Schools NJ, for a very illuminating conversation about what's going on with school funding, vouchers, charter schools, and much more. You can certainly check out the episode in its entirety once we go off the air on Facebook Live and also on the Jersey First YouTube page. Also check out Jersey First at their website, www.jerseyfirst.org. That's jersey1st.org. Don't forget to like them on Facebook. Of course, follow them on both Instagram and Twitter. Check out my own Instagram at The Amazing Professor, and certainly check me out on Twitter as well, folks, at No Filter Uribe. Make sure you share tonight's episode, folks. Yes, sharing is caring for New Jersey's premier award-winning journalist. So again, take the time on your Facebook or on your Twitter, on your Instagram, share the episode, and certainly, again, the more people know, the more people will be educated about what's going on in not just in today's educational climate, but also in today's political climate. Again, that's our show for this week, ladies and gentlemen. As always, remember, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, it is always real talk right here with Jersey First. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, a special shout out and thank you to everyone who joined me this past weekend for what was a very festive and joyous birthday party at Waterside, just an outstanding venue in Northeast New Jersey, overlooking the water right at the beautiful skyline of Manhattan there in North Bergen, New Jersey. Thank you to everybody, all the wonderful gifts. And again, I would argue my favorite gift of all is sitting right behind me, that beautiful portrait there with Cowboys Nation in the background. Again, folks, I never realized how photogenic and handsome I am. My God, look how great it's captured on photo. I'm just joking. I've always known that. Of course, you did too. Always remember, folks, again, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, it's always real talk right here with Jersey First. I am New Jersey's premier award-winning journalist, top 100 Latino, via Latino Spirit Online magazine, and the Garden State's most beloved and accurate political commentator, Fernando Uribe, saying so long, ladies and gentlemen, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Special programming note, next Monday, we will not be broadcasting. It is Memorial Day, so enjoy it with friends and family. Take a moment to honor all of those who gave their lives for our country in every single war and why we continue to live in the greatest country in the entire planet. It's always here, folks, in the good old US of A. Make sure you thank a veteran and honor those who served in our armed forces to give us the liberty, the freedom, and the democracy that we still have today. So again, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy Memorial Day weekend. And I'll see you coming up on Monday, June the 6th for the latest episode of Real Talk right here with Jersey First. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching.